Today I will be talking about how global warming contributes to the underdevelopment of countries, but before we get into that, let me introduce myself. My name is Michaela Kyle. I'm a junior at Bloomsburg University, and I'm majoring in biology with a concentration on ecology and environmental conservation. I believe this topic ties in with my major because it shows how climate change is an integral part of global society. I was looking forward to learning more about the ways underdeveloped countries contribute to global warming. However, my research shows that the bigger problem is how global warming contributes to the underdevelopment of countries. With the information in my previous podcast, it's clear that developed countries are the main contributors to global warming. So, how is their ignorance impacting innocent countries? One of the most notable similarities between the countries I will be addressing is that they are all facing a violent humanitarian crisis. The first topic I will be exploring is how climate change has affected these crises. First, though, let's go over the four countries this project will be focused on. According to the Human Development Index, the four most underdeveloped countries are Chad, Central African Republic, Somalia, and Southern Sudan. The Human Development Index measures human development based on lifespan, health, knowledgeability, and quality of life, rather than economic growth alone. I chose to use this index because all of these factors contribute to climate change, possibly even more than economic growth. Chad and Central African Republic are at the bottom two spots on the Notre Dame Global Adaptation Initiative list, making them the most vulnerable and unprepared countries to global warming. South Sudan is not on the list, and Somalia ranks at 164, only 23 countries away from the bottom. The Notre Dame Global Adaptation Initiative focuses on evaluating a country's vulnerability to climate change and their efforts to mitigate that vulnerability. They hope to help governments, businesses, and communities manage their priorities to properly prepare for climate change. The Notre Dame Global Adaptation Initiative bases their findings on vulnerability and readiness. Vulnerability measures a country's ability to adapt in the event of a climate crisis by accessing food, water, health, ecosystem service, human habitat, and infrastructure. Readiness is measured by using data from a country's economic, governance, and social sectors to evaluate its ability to leverage investments and use them to adapt. Now let's dig into how global warming has impacted these findings. Climate change has a direct impact on climate-related disasters, health challenges, food insecurity, and migration. These factors can intensify conflicts and decimate livelihoods. Also, with the increasing number of these occurrences, organizations that aim to help these crises are being stretched thin. Although climate change alone does not directly cause the crises themselves, it does amplify the weaknesses within the systems in place to mitigate them. One of the important topics here is disaster theory. Specifically, the real disaster is not the weather event or the hazard brought onto the people, but the way the people are equipped to handle it. In other words, the country's ability to react to the disasters greatly depends on the resources they have available to them. For underdeveloped countries, this could make them incredibly vulnerable to humanitarian crises. It creates a cycle that is nearly impossible to break out of without the help of a developed country. Both humanitarian and climate crises stem from a much deeper, systemic issue rooted into global society. With all of this in mind, coordination between developed and underdeveloped nations is becoming increasingly necessary. Additionally, it is proven that most global warming is caused by developed countries, so it seems fair to provide underdeveloped countries with the resources needed to mitigate it. So what's the outcome? As mentioned previously, the four most underdeveloped countries are also facing armed and violent humanitarian crises. I also described how climate change increases the risk of conflict and decreases the livelihood of those affected. While I review the crises reports of each country from the Human Rights Watch, it is important to keep in mind the ways climate action could have played a role. In Chad, much of the violence arose after Mohamed Idris Deby seized power and declared his rule in 2021. The protests on October 20, 2022 resulted in the protesters being killed and injured, and the perpetrators were not held accountable. In May of this year, there was a presidential election that interim President Deby won. Any international organizations that offered to supervise the election were denied. After his win, he and his security forces fired weapons over the cities and towns, killing at least 11 people and injuring hundreds. Yaya Diallo was an opposing runner for the Socialist Party Without Borders, but he was killed on February 28th in a supposed armed conflict between parties. However, the investigation showed his death was caused by a single gunshot to the side of the head at close range. The fighting in Sudan since April 2023 resulted in 650,000 Sudanese refugees, creating massive displacement. An additional 530,000 refugees were already in the country prior. Floods have also ravaged the country. These factors have greatly strained the humanitarian response. The Somalian government faces conflict with a militia group called Al-Shabaab. Al-Shabaab has killed hundreds of civilians, committed sexual violence against women and girls, and abused children. This group, as well as extreme weather patterns, has forced many Somalians out of their homes. Nearly 350,000 people in Somalia were internally displaced between January and October of this year. Somalia also faces extreme punishment for performing freedom of expression. On March 15th, a journalist was shot and killed. Many more journalists faced criminal punishment. In the Central African Republic, there are many civilians being targeted by the violence, affecting approximately half the population. Groups such as Azandi Ani Akapi Gabi, Union for Peace in the Central African Republic, and Return, Reclamation, Rehabilitation, also known as 3R, are all attacking citizens, resulting in many deaths. 451,000 citizens were internally displaced due to these conflicts, and an additional 750,000 people have gone to the Central African Republic to escape fighting in their own countries. In South Sudan, only 3 out of 5 school-aged children attend school, the largest proportion in the world. In March, all schools were closed for 2 weeks in response to a massive heat wave. The government severely restricts rights to freedom of expression, peaceful assembly, association, and movement. The humanitarian situation is exacerbated by intercommunal violence, food insecurity, and climate crisis. Hundreds of thousands of Sudanese refugees are arriving in South Sudan, including many that are returnees. Climate change-induced events have affected at least 890,000 people in South Sudan. Climate change may not have directly caused all of these events, but it is important to acknowledge the critical role that it played. These are all the sources I used, and thank you for watching.